today we're talking hooks. I'm gonna make this as easy as possible. Today, I'm gonna take these hooks here in front of me. I'm gonna show you which bait you should pair it up with and when you should use it, as well as, figuring out what size you should use. To make this quick and simple, I got 3 hooks. These are the 3 most commonly used hooks in bass fishing. We have the offset worm hook, the EWG worm hook, and the flipping hook. These hooks get used a lot, but I oftentimes see them used in the wrong scenario. Now, again, this comes down to personal preference, so don't go crazy. If you use one particular way and it works for you, that is fine. I just want to share with you guys how I go about using these hooks so that I can catch more fish. All right, so let's start off with the first hook. We have the offset worm hook. This is as simple as it gets. I say this all the time, so I hope this just registers with you guys. I have a straight hook, straight bait. I'm always throwing a straight hook with a straight bait, meaning stick baits, your 𝗙𝗍𝗶𝗶𝗹, your ribbon tail worms. I'm always throwing them on an offset worm hook. Here's why. I have a straight bait. Most of the action of this worm is coming out of the ribbon tail. And to get the maximum action out of that ribbon tail, you actually want the body of the worm to be stiff. So this hook is going to work as like a splint in that worm. So ooh, I just hooked myself right there. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna Texas rig it real quick to show you guys. If you don't know what a Texas rig is, feel free to hit the link down below. I have a tutorial on showing you how to Texas rig. But what we're gonna do here is we're gonna rig this guy up. And as you guys can see, that bait sits perfectly on that hook. Now what this is going to allow us to do is it's going to splint that worm. It's gonna get the maximum action out of the tail because that bait's always gonna be stiff. And it's also gonna keep us nimble. So when we're flipping in weeds and we're lifting a rod tip up and we're moving that bait around, it's gonna stay weedless and it's not really gonna get caught up on anything. So that's my go-to when I'm using an offset worm hook. Straight bait, straight shank. So from here, how do we know what size to use? Like what size is good? I do it this way. Use a hook that allows you to get as close as you can to the ribbon tail of that worm without affecting the action. So obviously you don't want a massive hook in there because it gets to a point where you have more hook than you do bait. But when you have a long bait like this and you have a long tail, a lot of times you'll find fish short striking. They're not always inhaling that worm. So if you can get down to close to the bottom of that worm, or oftentimes like a Senko or stick bait will have a little cut in the middle of the worm, that's where you're gonna wanna pair up the tip of your hook. So moving on to the next one, we have the EWG. If you guys don't know what an EWG is, it stands for extra wide gap. This is a hook that is very commonly used. If you learned a Texas rig, you probably learned to do it with this hook right here. Now, oftentimes I see a lot of people using this hook for everything. If it works for you, that's fine. Do what makes you happy and just get out there and fish. But this is when I'm using the EWG. Whenever I'm fishing a thick creature bait or a crawl, I'm gonna pick up the EWG. The reason being is when you Texas rig it, you have more space behind that hook. Now, to some of you, you might not understand why, that's a good thing to have. If you guys can see right here, there's quite a bit of space between my bait and that hook. The reason that that is so important is because when you're using a thicker soft plastic, you have more bait to push away from the tip of that hook. Meaning when the fish eats that bait, you need that hook to expose. So the more space that we have to push that bait away from the hook, the better. We're gonna get better exposure this way. And when you're using like a thin hook, like the straight offset, it's gonna be a lot harder to get exposure at the tip of that hook simply because the soft plastic is so thick. So thick soft plastic, EWG hook. Here's one thing that I wanna point out that you're gonna find with EWG hooks that is super important. You're gonna find different size wire hooks. So if you guys can look here in front of me, I'll show you these 2 hooks. These are the exact same size hook. They're both a 4/0, but if you look at the wire that it's made out of, one is thicker than the other. Now, some of you guys might just go right into the store and get the thicker one. And yes, it has a benefit, but let me explain to you why these hooks are different diameters. When you guys are fishing with a lighter rig, like your go-to setup, your 7-foot, medium heavy flipping rod, you're flipping bass jigs, you're flipping soft plastics, that is when you're gonna wanna use that thinner wire hook. you're gonna want your lighter hook with your lighter fluorocarbon as well as your lighter setup. The reason they have a thicker diameter hook is when you're getting into that heavier cover, that thicker stuff. Maybe you're now using a 7'3" medium heavy or heavy action rod with 50-pound braid. You're getting into that thicker stuff where you're dealing with pulling a fish out of heavy cover. That's when you're gonna wanna go with that thicker hook. The reason being is you have a bunch of power behind your setup, right? You got 50-pound braid, so you set the hook into a 5-pounder. If you have that thinner hook, you might just bend that hook out straight because all your gear is heavy duty, but your hook is not heavy duty. So match up the heavy duty hook with the heavy duty gear and match the lighter hook with the lighter fishing setup. And then we have the flipping hook. This is gonna be a pretty specific purpose hook. So if you guys use this in the right scenario, it's really gonna benefit you. But if you don't, I mean, it'll work, but I would recommend just using this for this purpose. When using a flipping hook, you're pretty much using it in a specific scenario like punching. So the reason that you're using a hook like this is because it has a straight shank. Now, why this is important is because when you guys are punching weed mats, 90% of the time, you're throwing up in the air, you're punching through that thick cover, and you're just gonna pick your rod tip up and down, right? You're doing an up and down motion, you're reeling it in, and then you're redoing it. You're not, flipping into a shoreline, slowly dragging that bait across the bottom. So the reason that this hook is so beneficial is because of the straight shank. A straight shank allows you to rig up this hook so that it sets vertically. So when you pull that rod tip up, this hook is gonna go up or it's gonna move in an upward setting motion. So, that's where this hook really comes into play. I'm punching a weed mat, I'm gonna jack that hook straight up in the air. This is gonna set straight up, go right through the top of that fish's mouth, and you're gonna get that hook set. This is going to be a hook that you're using in heavy cover, and it's pretty much, like I said, a specific purpose hook if you use it the correct way, but if you got another way that you like to use it, that's fine too. But I'm always using the flipping hook in a vertical hook setting situation. For the last two hooks I just talked about, when it comes to sizing up your bait correctly, pay attention to what that bait has to offer. If the bait has a lot of appendages that move, use a smaller hook. If it doesn't have a lot of appendages that move and it's just the very bottom, then you can use a little bit of a bigger hook. So that's how I do it. When I got a lot of appendages, I'm shrinking that hook down. When I don't, I'm upsizing because I'm just caring about the hook set at that point. There's a few ways that you guys can just easily look at a hook and pair it with a bait. You don't have to get too crazy, and at the end of the day, it comes down to personal preference. Everybody has a reason that they use a hook, and you just gotta figure out what works best for you. Everybody's fishing situation is different based on where you live, so you never know. Just because you're doing something different doesn't mean it's wrong. You're just trying something else out. So if you guys wanna learn more about fishing, consider hitting that subscribe button. We have tons of videos on this channel here coming at you. My name's Jordan. I'll see you next time.